My name is Trine Flockhart. I'm a professor in international relations in the School of Politics and International Relations here at the University of Kent. In the lecture today, I ask if we're witnessing the end of international order. This is a question that to many will seem to have an obvious answer. After all, you don't need to be an expert to be able to see that the world is becoming a pretty disorderly place. In fact, many feel that the world is almost spinning out of control, and they're eager for solutions for how we might bring back order, or, as the Brexit campaign put it, take back control. The problem is that although it is easy to blame certain institutions or certain social groups or the establishment for the current disorder, finding solutions on how to return to order is not that easy. In this lecture, I want to suggest that the reason the world appears to be spinning out of control cannot be attributed to certain institutions such as the EU, certain social groups such as immigrants or refugees, or indeed to any particular politicians or to the establishment. Rather, what I'm suggesting is that we're currently going through fundamental change in the international system, and that it is this process of fundamental change that leads to the many crises and the feeling that the world is spinning out of control. Now, let me just be clear about this. Change in the international system is a really big deal. It is also something that only happens very rarely, and when it does happen, it is associated with crisis, uncertainty, and often violence. To make matters worse, systemic change is also extremely complex and likely to be a long process of subtle changes whose significance may only be visible retrospectively. In fact, I don't think systemic change is well understood at all, even by those international relations theories that claim that it is well understood. The problem is that we haven't got much data, because in the last 200 years, the international system has only changed 3 times. It changed in 1815 after the Napoleonic Wars, in the protracted and bloody conflict and the collapse of the European order between 1914 and 1945, and then again in 1989 with the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union. I believe that the current process of systemic change is every bit as important as the end of the Cold War, and it may even be similar in terms of scope and character to the process that spelled the end of the European order in the first half of the 20th century. Traditionally, systemic change has been explained by changes in the polarity of the system. That is, how many powers or poles are present in the system. If you follow this tradition, then 1815 was the consolidation of multipolarity. 1945 saw the end of multipolarity and the beginning of bipolarity. And 1989 saw the end of bipolarity and the beginning of unipolarity. Today, the argument by some is that we're now seeing the end of unipolarity and a return to multipolarity. I have to say that I'm not happy with the reliance on polarity as the main measurement of the systemic change. And I don't think we are on the way back to multipolarity. I think that to understand the current process of change, we need to look at conceptions of international order and how order is constituted and maintained, and what happens when established conceptions of order are challenged. Before we can answer what happens when established conceptions of order are challenged, we need to ask another question that might also appear to be a simple one. This question is, what do we actually mean by international order? Well, I want to suggest that we need to distinguish between international order as a condition and international order as an object. But the two are very closely connected. Now, international order as a condition can be seen as a particular kind of international social activity to facilitate the achievement of three elementary and presumed universal goals related to life, truth, and property. For the past 200 years or so, it has been assumed that international order is contingent on these three goals: a minimum degree of security against violence, a shared acceptance of the sanctity of promises, and stability of the possession of property. Now, you have to remember that we're talking about international order. So our focus is on relations between different human societies, mostly states. It is not so much the security of the individual that is in focus here, although, of course, that is also important. International order as an object arises out of international order as a condition. An international order, or perhaps the international order, is constituted when a cluster of states share a sense of common interests in upholding the elementary goals of social life and converge around a leading state to establish rules and institutions to ensure behavior that is consistent with the common goals. Such an international order has existed in different versions for the past 200 years. It has existed as a cluster of republican or liberal states which have converged around a leading state in what has now become known as the liberal international order. You may also have heard it referred to as the rules-based order. The liberal international order was initially under British leadership in what was known as Pax Britannica. And since 1945, a slightly altered and more institutionalized version has been under leadership of the United States in what is known as Pax Americana. Following the collapse of the competing Soviet Union in the 1990s, the liberal order became almost global in reach. This prompted liberal scholar Francis Fukuyama to declare that we had reached the end of history. Well, I'm sure you are aware that history did not end in the 1990s, but it carried on relentlessly, and it seems that we have now reached another point in history where international order is once again in flux. So, what is it that is actually taking place at the moment? And what future international order can we expect? Now, there's broad agreement that the international system is becoming more pluralistic as new powers and new forms of actors have become more important. So the word multi is used for all of the different positions that describe the future we're heading towards. There are currently three competing positions on what kind of future we're moving towards. I have labeled these positions as the multipolar position, the multi-partner position, and the multicultural position. The multipolar position is the most prevalent. Proponents argue that what lies ahead is a multipolar world in which several great powers will compete and use traditional balance of power politics to balance against each other and to advance their own interests. The United States is assumed to remain the primary power, albeit closely followed and possibly challenged by China and a number of other emerging great powers. It's a little uncertain what role the United States will play in this position. It may be that the United States chooses to be the primary power in the international system, which will be very costly. Or it may be that it chooses to withdraw back home to take care of its own problems and issues. The second position, the multi-partner position, is favored by liberal internationalists such as Hillary Clinton. As Secretary of State, she argued that what lies ahead is not a multipolar world, but a multi-partner world. The multi-partner world is essentially a continuation of the existing system in which the United States will attempt to maintain its leadership position. However, where the main ordering principle until now has been multilateralism, in the new system, ordering will increasingly be based on different partnerships with a wide range of international actors. This position assumes that partners can be co-opted into a reformed version of the existing order, and it assumes a continued high level of American engagement in global affairs. The third position, the multicultural position, emphasizes that whilst the international system will be characterized by diffusion of power, it will also be characterized by a convergence around capitalist forms of economic governance. And on top of that, it will be characterized by divergence of ideas about what constitutes the good life, how to run your own country, and also perhaps about how to forge order. The multicultural position argues that what lies ahead is a multicultural world in which the challenge will be to reach a global consensus on the collective security challenges, whilst also accepting diversity in domestic and regional affairs. All of the three positions have elements of truth in them, but because they have not asked what is an international order and how is it constituted, they're not able to see the whole picture. In my analysis, what is important, but I have to say largely overlooked, is a growing contestation of the condition of order. It seems to me that we're moving to a situation where we cannot assume agreement that order is contingent on the three elementary goals related to life, truth, and property. It is also becoming apparent that there's no longer universal acceptance of the rules and institutions that have been forged in the liberal international order that were designed to realize the three elementary goals. If the condition of order is seen as contingent on other goals than the ones that have underpinned the liberal order so far, or if it is judged that other rules and other institutions are relevant for securing the basic goals, then new international orders are likely to emerge. We can already see this, for example, in Putin's ambitions for Eurasian order, in the ambitions for establishing an Islamic caliphate, and in the Chinese support for the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank, which is seen as an example of a specifically Asian institution to compete with liberal order institutions such as the World Bank. Using my analysis of international order as a condition and as an object, what appears on the horizon is a completely new international system. The system that appears to be emerging is composed of different international orders rather than by different sovereign states. In other words, what lies ahead is a multi-order world rather than a multipolar world or a multi-partner world or a multicultural world. The multi-order world will contain many of the characteristics that have been outlined by the three positions that I have already touched on. But the main difference is that in a multi-order world, the primary dynamics are likely to be within and between different international orders rather than between multiple sovereign states. This may not sound like a lot, but it is a major difference because relationships and dynamics in a multi-order system would be very different from what they would be in a multipolar world or multipolar system. We will see the emergence of new parallel institutions, and global cooperation will have to be forged on a background of different conceptions of order and contestation on how to forge that order. For example, imagine what happens if conventions are no longer respected, or procedures for negotiating, for diplomacy or war are no longer universally accepted. Moreover, for the West, who after all has been the main instigator, the main owner and beneficiary of the liberal international order, the change is going to be especially unsettling because it basically ends 200 years of continuous expansion of the liberal international order. The current liberal liberal international order will continue to exist. But the global reach of its values, its practices, rules and institutions will be a thing of the past. Instead, competing orders will establish their own practices, their own rules and their own institutions, and they will be based on their own values and their interpretation of what constitutes the good life and how the condition of order is best achieved. There's no doubt that the process ahead will be experienced by those within the liberal order as deeply unsettling. And many will feel that international order has indeed come to an end. But of course, just as history did not end in 1989, international order is not at an end either, but is merely at a new beginning. Thank you very much.